So, guys, I do want to do a review of AEW 6th anniversary show, and there's a lot of positives and negatives to the show, but I have to make a few announcements that, number one, I'm going to be upgrading how I do my channel within the next couple of months. Like, Wrestle Tati, she did something where she included, like, graphics and, star ratings and even, like, like letter grades and other things like that, and I want to do that improvement. And then the other thing too is that I have to really think about, when I'm going to post these videos because the issue is that I work a lot of hours. Like for example, this week I'm working, roughly like 80 hours and when you work at a hospital, they'll be like, "Oh, can you stay an extra hour?" And that's kind of like a middle finger because imagine if you work 14 hours and they say work an extra hour or whatever. So it's almost like I have to balance, getting some sleep, doing these reviews when I have energy, and then actually just, not so I'm dozing off really. And I also just want to say that, I really want to get back into fantasy booking. Like I just had my birthday this weekend, and my goal really is just to look at, how I'm doing things and try to, have more of a work life balance. So, I definitely want to get to a point where I'm doing like travel videos. Like what is it like to, go to St. Louis? What is it like to go to Blood and Guts? What is it like to go to Nashville? What it's like to go to Wrestle Dream and World's End and Full Gear and all that good stuff, really. So I want to do more travel videos with you guys. And I also want to do another thing, too, where I want to improve the weekly shows and stuff like that. And I'm also going to do a mix of, voiceover, when I'm way too busy or when, I have relatives at home, really. And I'm also going to do something where, I'm going to be on the microphone as much as I can, really. But I will make a lot of improvements because, um, I am my brother wants me to move out in like 2 years. So I have to make sure that I make money off of this shit. And ultimately, too, I have a lot of potential, but I need to start, being like Wrestle Tati and a few other these channels where I have to start improving my fucking game, really. So I also want to say a final thing is that I'm going to try to be very fair and balanced because I know like there's some people like off the mic's ropes sent a channel that he says that he's for AEW, but everything he does is very anti AEW. And then also too, like we'll take it from there. Really, I have some crazy ghetto ass neighbors. You know how it is. So AEW 6th anniversary show. So it opens with Josh Alexander and the Young Bucks versus Brodito and Kenny Omega. So they just did like this opening promo and they really hype the show and they do a really, really great job. And they just like say, hey, we've been around for 6 years. That's a big accomplishment. And yes, it is. There are many promotions that, do struggle after a couple of years. And yes, AEW has went downwards, but they usually draw over 100,000 people for pay-per-views. They have a lot of people going to their events, really. They are not like TNA wrestling where they're not at that point where they're drawing thousands of people, really. So definitely for a company to be, doing this well, it's good, but things have to go upwards, really. So unfortunately, after this really serious promo, we have the Young Bucks and their 48-hour film project comedy. And as I said, 48-hour film project comedy means it's dumb, stupid, silly comedy, because if you watch a 48-hour film project film, it's usually just dumb, silly comedy, and you're going to hear crickets, really. So what happens is that they want to spend their earnings on a very epic and cool promo, and what happens is that one of the Bucks actually goes to a casino in Florida, and and he loses all of his money, really. So they can't afford like an epic promo. So they got like um a graphic saying the broke Bucks. And again, this is kind of like what hurts them is that when are they going to be serious? Can they do like a match like saying, hey, you know what, we want to be taken seriously, we want the titles, because once we have the titles we can be serious, really. So they're flanderized, they're just doing this dumbass 48-hour film project, um shit, really. So in the match, here are the moves that I like. That Omega did a Hurricane Run on Josh Alexander. Brodita does an assisted crossbody double team on the Young Bucks. Bandito does a double Hurricane Rana on the Young Bucks. Um, there was a point in the match where they were doing the Macarena to each other, and honestly, this is kind of what hurts AEW because, again, it's 48-hour film project comedy. Like, why do you randomly do this stupid shit, really? Because I understand WWE, they do dumb, silly crap and stuff like this, but there's times when it's almost like it's out of nowhere, it's random, it's stupid, makes no sense. Stop it and start finding people, Tony Khan, because if you make it too goofy, then it's almost like why should we take it seriously? Um, Bandito does a top rope moonsault on the villains. Bandito lifts Brody King and does a scoop slam, double team attack on Josh Alexander. So basically, he lifts Brody King in a scoop slam move, drops on Josh Alexander, almost like you're taking damage from a 300-pound man falling on top of you. Young Bucks do a Cazadora cutter on Bandito. The babyface, they do like a three-way pile driver. I mean, they grab each of the villains and they do like a separate pile driver. Josh Alexander does a German suplex sequence on Kenny Omega. Kenny Omega does a Poison Rana power bomb V trigger on Josh Alexander. And then Bandito does a 21 plex, and then Kenny Omega does a one wing angel on Josh Alexander. And then what I would say is that this was a great opening match. You really hyped the crowd. Bandito is a really great athlete. Brody King does a lot of really great shit, really. But what the bad part of this match is that a former teenage champion, Josh Alexander, a guy who's been a champion for over a year, has long, great matches. He loses as usual, really. And that's not good because more than likely they had this match because they didn't want the Young Bucks to lose. So you just throw in, your jobber, and Josh Alexander should not be in the jobber role. So after that, the Young Bucks do a beatdown on Kenny Omega, and then he's saved by Jurassic Express. And then what happens is that I was saying to myself, okay, are they going to set up a match between Jurassic Express versus the Young Bucks? And then what happens is Andrade comes out and he attacks Kenny Omega, and the Don Callis family has another member. And I was kind of saying to myself, okay, how many people do they have in the Don Callis family now? And I counted, I think at the end of tonight, it's like 14, like 12 to 14 members. But that's including Don Callis himself, really. So technically, as they said, he has his own army, really, but it's almost like a little ridiculous. And yes, I do agree that they don't have a lot of male single stars that are babyface. You only have like Eddie. I can't even think of one, really, because you had Anthony Bowens, and now he's a singles. You had Eddie Kingston, now he's in a tag team with Hook, really. And then Osprey and Swerve are out, really. So it's almost like, you need more like charismatic baby faces that are single stars, or you may have to break up some groups, really, or you may have to do like 5 members of the Don Callis family just, break apart, really, because they're like, hey, there's just too much, really. So the next match was the TNT Championship between Kyle Fletcher and Orange Cassidy. I really wasn't into this match, so there's a bunch of dives, there's back and forth reversals. I really liked this match in the sense that Kyle Fletcher was being a lot more serious, because I know that sometimes, like when he faced Kyle O'Reilly and people were making fun of the fact that both their names were Kyle, as a heel, he was hamming it up with them, and he wasn't doing this. He wasn't doing like the stupid ass comedy kicks and other shit like that. So I really, really respect him for not doing that. So I give him points for this, but I really wasn't into the match. I'm not a fan of Orange Cassidy. In my opinion, he's just a comedy wrestler, and his whole gimmick of not taking wrestling seriously, it just doesn't really work, really. I think he needs a character change, but obviously who was going to win this. You knew Kyle Fletcher was going to win, and I would rather see Hologram. And so what happens at the end of the match is that you see Hologram attacking Orange Cassidy, and then you find out it's actually Clone, and Clone is a wrestler from CMLL in Mexico. So he's trying to play like the evil Hologram. So now the Don Callis family has one more member, so it's like 12 people. And actually, they don't have all the people out, because I know like I think there's 2 people that are injured, Wardlow and Brian Cage. But it's almost like, as I said, now Don Callis has 12 people. And it's also bad because a lot of the shows now, Don Callis is in a majority of segments. So it's almost like, from 9 a.m., from 8 a.m. all the way to like 9 a.m., 8 p.m. to always 9 p.m., you see Don Callis throughout this, really. So it's almost like the Don Callis show, really, almost. So that's also a bad part of this, is that you can over-feature him a little too much. And I think somebody needs to make a video on Don Callis and all that stuff, really. The next match was Claudio, Moxley, Daniel Garcia versus Hobbs, Joe, and Hangman. And I felt a little mad because I was like saying this, we're an hour into the show. You've not announced any matches for Wrestle Dream. The other thing that I was saying is that there's some matches that they could have created already. They could have created Claudio and Hobbs based on what they did in this match, and they also could have done something. They could have done the Young Bucks versus Jurassic Express, or even something like Jurassic Express versus um, Jurassic Express, versus Bandito, or they could have done something like Jurassic Express and Bandito versus two members of Don Cal's family and the Young Bucks, like a 4-on-4 tag team or something like that. But they are not creating matches, and the show is less than 3 weeks away, really, and that's bullshit. We're less than 2 weeks away, and that's fucking bullshit. Um, and they also announced that they didn't do a good job at this. Like they announced that Dynamite is going to be on October 7th, next Tuesday. Collision's going to be on October 8th. But you need to have like advertisements and graphics throughout the show saying that, hey, we're switching up the hours, really, because I had to write this down because I have to work those days and I have to make sure that I don't miss my AEW. Also, too, that during this match, the the triple team versus triple team. Samoa Joe does a senton on Moxley. Hangman does a fallaway slam on Daniel Garcia. Daniel Garcia does a double shoulder tackle to Moxley and Claudio. Hobbs grabs Claudio and does a repeated sequence of World Strong Slams on the ring apron. Claudio does a gut wrench slam on Hobbs. I was saying to myself that they should do Hobbs versus Claudio at Wrestle Dream, like big man versus big man, black meat versus white meat. Like I think that they've done enough to say, okay, people want to see the big men fighting, really, and I think that they've not done big men that well, really. So I think Claudio versus Hobbs should happen. Also, too, my girl Wrestle Toddy would like this because obviously she gets to see two big, strong, sexy men without their shirt off. She deserves that. And the whole entire world. And then also ends with a buckshot lariat onto Claudio, 2 out of 5 stars. I do not like when they do repeat triple or like triple tag teams or double tag team, like 4-on-4 matches. Like you just had two of them in a period of an hour. In a period of an hour, like 75 minutes, really. So I felt it's a little repetitive. It's 2 out of 5 stars. And also, too, just like the first match, you kind of repeat the same formula, the same Dave Meltzer match type of formula, where a match goes on for a super long time. It should have ended maybe a little bit earlier within this. And then you're really just showcasing your wrestlers. There's really no follow-up, really. And then I said to myself, I'm a little mad because there's been no Wrestle Dream matches announced right now, really. And then what happens is that during the match, I don't see this, and they didn't make a big deal about this in any of the replays. They should have done that in a replay. That I think what happens is that Hangman tags himself in, and that pisses off Samoa Joe. And then also Hangman accidentally drops the trios title. That pisses off Joe. And I said to myself that And I really just said to myself, you know what, are they going to set up Joe versus Hangman? And I said to myself, that feels out of the blue because why the fuck are they arguing? We need a backstage segment tonight to kind of establish why Joe and Hangman are pissed off because I don't get it. I just don't get why they're fucking around and fighting. They have to make some sense. They have to kind of like contextualize. And then after that, there's a few things that happened. There was a segment, I don't remember when, during the show, of Mercedes talking to the talking about having a match next week at Title Tuesday, and I was kind of saying to myself, I'm a little worried because who's going to face her at Wrestle Dream, because you had to start building up to that, and then also you had Harley Cameron come out and kind of joke around with her puppet, and this is kind of like what I said, that Harley Cameron is like the female Max Caster, like where she could be that underdog, what, I want to put in a good fight. I want to, take shit seriously type of thing, really. And she's not doing that. when that could have done a lot for her. She doesn't know how to turn off the comedy, and she's in an environment where they won't let her turn off the comedy. The other thing too is that she and Mercedes might become a team, and then again we have some issues because there's talks there, like JD from New York is predicting that you may have two situations. You may have Mercedes 12 belts. You take the title off of Statlander, you give it to Mercedes. You take the tag team tournament, and then you have like maybe Harley Cameron and Mercedes, and then you have Mercedes like 12 belts. But then the problem is you're bearing the women's division. Like Mercedes cannot be built into this. She cannot be built into this belt collector type of person any further with the AEW titles, because then she's going to hold the ROH women's title, and then she's going to be Mercedes 13 belts. The unlucky Mercedes. You're unlucky to face a 13 belt champion. It gets to a point where it's like she needs to be nerfed, and that's why you need blood and guts and other things like that to build up 10 women to be opponents for Mercedes and Tony Storm and also Athena, like because you need to start nerfing these three women because if not, it's going to be like the Mercedes Moné show. The same way when Bully Ray took over TNA Wrestling, and it was always about him and his title reign and other things like that. So they're getting to that point where they have to start nerfing Mercedes, and they don't do that, it's going to really kill the ratings. Then you had like Ty Mello, and Ty Mello should never ever be allowed to cut a promo. She did a very piss poor job. So that's not good. And I also want to mention that Mark Briscoe did a promo. He needs to start doing that in the ring because honestly, he has a voice of an angel, really. So as I said this many times, he should not be doing backstage promos. He needs to be doing in-ring promos because you can really hype the fuck out of people. Same thing with Kyle Fletcher. Kyle Fletcher can hype the fuck out of people, and so can Eddie Kingston. They all can hype the fuck out of people. So don't have any of those motherfuckers speak backstage. Have them speak in the ring. And then also, like, you had the match Tony Storm versus Ty Mello. I wasn't into this match because you obviously know who's going to win. And then also, Tony Storm was saying something like, okay, I really want to have a match with Chris Statlander because, they had a triple match and really Statlander's win fell out of the blue, really. So Tony Storm wants to have a one-on-one match. Ultimately, yes. This is something I want to see. The next thing I want to say, if I forget about it later, is Chris Statlander needs to make the 450 her finisher because not a lot of people can do that. Not a lot of women's wrestlers. You don't see a lot of women's wrestlers do shit like that. So she needs to do the 450 as a finisher, and I'm okay with this match because they're going to have a long epic, did you really prove what you need to prove when we had a triple threat match? So, yes, I am happy for that. I give you points for that, for having a match. And then what happens is Eddie Kingston cuts a promo, Briscoe cuts a promo, but backstage they need to do in the ring. I just said that. The next thing is that they announced that next week it's going to be... next week's going to be Okada and Takeshita teaming up against Brodito, and it's very evidential that that they're kind of like not happy that they work with each other. So when I look at the match card for Wrestle Dream, I have a predictions of matches that are going to happen. You're going to have Eddie Kingston versus Kyle Fletcher TNT Championship. You're going to have Tony Storm, Chris Statlander Women's Title, Hangman Samoa Joe Men's Championship, Moxley and Darby Allin I Quit match, and you're probably going to have Konosuke Takeshita versus Okada. And I think as a fifth match, it may be Young Bucks versus... You might have the Young Bucks versus Jurassic Express or Young Bucks versus Brodito, or you may do a 4-on-4, like Young Bucks, Don Callis family, and Jurassic Express and Bandito or something like that. But right now, I kind of have a feeling about 5 or 6 matches that are going to happen. Really, and they announced maybe like 4 or 5 matches on the show. So they announced me like 4 or 5 matches on the show, really. So I think, or give you kind of hints of other matches. So I think So I do feel like the show was a success, really, because the whole point of the show, in my opinion, was that they have more eyes on the product right now because it's an anniversary episode. So you need to start building the Wrestle Dream matches. So that's good. They have the Gates of Agony versus Swirl, which is Blake Christian and some other guy. And then I kind of said to myself, this is 0 out of 5 to me because while I like the Gates of Agony and I appreciate what they're doing, you knew who was going to win this match. Blake Christian's going to win. This is kind of really random. Why have this match when we know who's going to win, really? Because they always lose. I would have rather had Ricochet versus Blake Christian or something like that, and then have them go a while and have them, like, have, a couple of two falls on Ricochet or something like that, really. Because Ricochet really is the mouthpiece of the faction, really. And they announced it's going to be Hurt Syndicate versus Ricochet in the Gates of Agony at a street fight. At the next week's show, really. I kind of said to myself, imagine if this happened at WrestleDream. A lot of people would want to be buying WrestleDream to see this. So it was almost like a great match that you could have at WrestleDream. And then they also announced Okada and Takeshita versus Rodito. And I was saying to myself, imagine if that was a WrestleDream match. And then you build Okada, Takeshita at Full Gear. You would have like 2 months worth of matches, really. But pay-per-view matches, but they're kind of blowing it on television shows. But sometimes you need to have some pay-per-view quality matches on television shows. And then and the other thing is that they had an interview with Chris Statlander, and Chris Statlander's tag team partner is Harley Cameron. So she was cutting a promo about, I think, having a match next week, if I remember correctly, and then also talking about Toni Storm and challenging her at Full Gear. But once again, you kind of throw this under the bus because you have Harley Cameron being funny and other shit like that. And this is kind of like, the issue, really. Because now you have something serious and you kind of throw it under the bus for dumb comedy, really. The next thing is that you had Okada and Takeshita be upset that they work with each other. And it's a little bit of a mix to me because with Takeshita and Okada, they know how to be funny. They're like John Cena. They know how to be funny and they know how to be serious. And they know how to be funny and serious at the same time and people be over and stuff like that, really. And them to be over. Like they work well with it because there's a lot of time in AEW where you have people doing the Macarena and other shit where it does feel like a deflection, really. Where there's some people who can do both and be successful. Like when they claim we're a tag team, you have the Max Caster rap. It was funny. It was controversial. Then you had the match where they were serious. So some people can be peanut butter and jelly with comedy and seriousness, and some people are like, water and oil with it, or it's almost like, a fart in church, really, like the serious and the distraction. So the main event match was Wheeler Yuta, Chris Statlander versus Darby Allin and no, I'm sorry, I fucked this up, really. So it's the Death Riders, which is Wheeler Yuta and Marina Shafir versus Darby Allin and Chris Statlander. So, again, this will confuse me a little bit because it was a tornado tag. And if I'm correct, in tornado tags, it is a regular match. It's not a no DQ match. It's not a false count anywhere match. So I think what they should have done is they could have just had them have an intergender tag team, and then they just started brawling and fucking things up, really, like not obeying the rules. The match gets thrown out, and then they just have a fight in the crowd, really, because sometimes with AEW, they can benefit from different types of matches. So that just means that there could be a match that's supposed to happen in the main event. It doesn't happen. There's just a bunch of brawling and chaos because you have to do something different every single time, really. So, like, it really felt like a false count anywhere match, and then it turned into a hardcore match. And then many people don't know the rules of a tornado tag team. Like, some people think it just means, two people fight. I think if I'm correct, tornado tag team means all the members can fight each other, really, but it's it's DQ rules, meaning that you have to be in the ring. If you go out more than 10 seconds, it gets thrown out, really. Or if there's hardcore stuff, it gets thrown out, really. So when you kind of have all this crazy shit, really, people kind of have to think themselves. They have to go to Google and they have to research the rules and be like, hey, what are the actual rules of this match? They fight in the crowd, they do a bunch of dives, and then the problem is, you just had Moxley and Darby just do dives and other shit like that. You also had the coffin match where there's a bunch of that shit in the audience. You also had thumbtack spots. You already did the shit. So it's almost like, all repeat wrestling. With WWE, yeah, they repeat shit, but they don't do it that as frequently as AEW, really. So Darby Allin does a second rope dive onto Yuta. Yuta's sitting on a chair. He gets out of the way, so he kind of crashes into a chair. And Wheeler Yuta does a suplex off of Darby Allin from the top rope into stairs. Chris Statlander does a suplex of on Marine Shafir onto the timekeeper's table. Darby Allin does a superplex on Yuta into a pile of chairs. Wheeler Yuta does an inverted net breaker to Darby Allin off on the ring apron post and ring apron to Darby Allin. Yuta introduces thumbtacks, all repeat wrestling. Chris Statlander drops Marie Saphir onto the thumbtacks. Her feet land onto the thumbtacks. Chris Statlander does a 450 onto Wheeler Yuta who, after he got blinded. Darby Allin does a coffin drop, and so they both hit like a double finisher on Wheeler Useless. And then also when that happened, I said to myself, Chris Statlander needs to make the 450 her finisher. If not, fuck that bitch. Because, most women don't do 450s. That's going to make her stand out. She does that the pay-per-view to Tony Storm. That's good. If she doesn't do that, Chris Statlander, you don't know shit, son. Overall, I would say this, that the pros of this week is that you had 4 to 6 matches for Wrestle Dream, or maybe matches that you kind of see are brewing, like Briscoe versus Kyle Fletcher, not announced, but it could happen. Okada Takeshita could happen. Young Bucks versus Jurassic Express, or Bandito and Jurassic Express versus Young Bucks and 2 members of the Don Callis family. I also will say that, yes, they built some must-see matches for next week's show. Originally, I was not going to watch the next week's show and picked up Overtime, but I'm going to say, fuck the Overtime. Fuck that Overtime. Because we got to see Takeshita and Okada have their nigga moment. Like, they're gonna break apart, and then they're going to have... they're more likely going to have Takeshita and Okada face each other at Wrestle Dream. That needs to happen. Hurt Syndicate, versus Ricochet and the Gates of Agony. That's going to be good. A lot of really great matches for next week. And there was a bunch of issues with the show. That number one, they had a very bad formatting. They had a very bad, order of matches, really, because your penultimate match was technically a squash match of Swirl, and people knew who was going to win, really. And then also you kind of had a squash match as well with Tony Storm and Ty Mello, because nobody thought that was going to win. There are many matches where you kind of felt like you knew who was going to win. Not that like many of the matches are predictable. Sometimes it's okay to have a match that's predictable, and then the person that's not predictable wins. The other issue is many of these matches were repeats. Like, obviously, the opening match and the 9 o'clock match was the same structure of a match going for too long. And everybody getting their shit in. And then also, too, you just had a match, your main event match, where there were a bunch of dives, and then, at your event 2 weeks ago, you did a bunch of dives in the audience, and then you did shit like thumbtack spots. So sometimes you just can't repeat. You're actually in Florida, so what would happen if you had actually maybe like alligator teeth, or you did something like maybe like, toy alligators or alligator Legos or green Legos or something like that. Like, do something a little different, or something like kind of Florida related, or even like, you have some pineapples or something like that, or like even pineapple skins, because they're thorned or whatever. Like, you could have done something different, maybe something Florida related, instead of just like thumbtacks. Like, I know I'm trying to be a little creative, and maybe some of the creative ideas I have is a little stupid. I really wish there was more backstage segments on the show, because I do feel that they had some, but not a lot. I think they overdid it with matches. And then the other thing that I would say is that they should have had more advertisements and say, hey, we're going to have the Women's Blood and Guts match. Let's do a promo on that. Let's interview some women. Let's make this a big deal, because they really did not, do a promo or video package for Greensboro. They should have done that. And then also, too, they changed the hours for next week's Dynamite and Collision. They should have had a promo. They should have done that, really. And they didn't do that, because when you're changing the hours of a show, you need to kind of make sure people know about it, and there's a couple of reminders, and they didn't do that. So I think with everything said, I would say that this was a C+ show for me. I think they had significant weaknesses of the show, but the saving grace is that Wrestle Dream is in 2.5 weeks. It's roughly, if I remember correctly, I think today's the 2nd. So it's roughly 16 days away. There are some matches. There are matches that I definitely want to see. I'm going to St. Louis. But it's also a thing too where they're not doing something like saying, "Oh, we're going to wait next week," which is like a week before the show, really. So they understand that it's not good to have wrestling events, and it's not good to do something like have a pay per view and announce all the matches a week before or 2 weeks before. Like usually it should be like a month before they start announcing matches. So they understood that this show was the anniversary show. They had really great matches, but they did something where they build up matches to the pay per view, which was the ultimate goal and my bonus points for this. And then also too, I will say that they didn't do a lot of people saying, "Hey, I'm here. I've been here for 6 years," or "AEW means that this to me, and this is why I'm here. This is why I want to accomplish things," or "By the 7th year anniversary, I want to accomplish these things in AEW," or I want to do these things. Like you could have done more of that type of stuff, really. Or you could have interviewed the women and say, like, "Oh, this is the 6 year anniversary of Blood and Guts." Or somebody says something like, "This is the 6 year anniversary of AEW." On this show, this is the first time that they've ever announced a women's Blood and Guts match on the 6 year anniversary. By the next year anniversary, I want to be the TBS champion. By this next year anniversary, I want to be the women's champion. So they need to work harder on these type of tie-ins. Like, here's something that's going on now. Let's tie it into a future match or a future goal for a wrestler. And they don't do that, and they're failing in that department. And that's so fucking easy to fix, really. But overall, C plus show, and I'm happy that I've watched this. And also, too, with my show, I'm going to be working hard on notes, really, because I got to make sure that, there's people like Wrestle Tati, and a few other people, my girl Wrestle Tati, and a few other people that do a really great job. And, and I'm inspired to do better, really. And when I mean like my girl Wrestle Toddy, I'm just like being cool with her, and like she's cool, we're friends, and that's that. I'm not trying to like hit on her or whatever. Like she's not my girlfriend or whatever. Really. I don't want to be. I just want to say I'm inspired by her to do better. I'm inspired by her to improve the quality of my channel. I've watched this guy too who does like road trips to professional wrestling shows, like a lot of the AEW shit. So I'm inspired by him to pick up my game, really. So I'm inspired by Wrestle Toddy and a few other people as well. John Ritlin, off the Mike's Rope Sports Network. And there's another guy who does like road trips and other things like that. So I'm inspired to pick up my motherfucking game for all you wonderful, awesome motherfuckers, really. Because I want to turn this into a living. I don't want to be out on the street in a couple of years because my brother's going to kick me out of this place. And I got to have some good income in addition to the jobs that I'm doing. And then also, too, that even though I'm working a lot of hours at the hospital, even though I work like 80-hour weeks and whatever, 60 to 80 hours a week, even though my boss, is a motherfucker, he's going to tell me, okay, you worked like maybe 56 hours, stay an extra hour, don't get a lot of sleep and whatever, I still gotta do my best, really. I'm gonna be a fighter this year. I need to be a fighter for you guys. I need to be a fighter for myself, really, because I really want to have those subscribers. I really want to make this a living, and I really just want to have fun with my life. Wrestling is fun. I like AEW. I like other shows that I'm going to, and I want to keep on fighting and enjoying all this shit.